Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to this latest edition of FreeTFOS, where I take stories from across the internet and read them for your entertainment. This particular story is called Billy Bob's Space Trucker and is part of a series. If you're new to the series, there is a playlist listed down below in the description. And as always, I hope that you enjoy. Chapter 32. The war in space against America had ground to a halt on the Xeno front. With engines incapable of FTL speeds, it would take years to reach human space. The fact that the Council had forbidden FTL tech other than FTL gates meant no one was prepared for the sudden takeover of the FTL network in human space. The battle for TR-231 had proven how woefully unprepared the Council races were for a war with a species that had no interest in fighting properly as the rest of the galaxy had for centuries. The human forces had suffered heavy casualties, but they had not only wiped out all Council forces in the area, they had captured a dreadnought and saved the Lucifer's hammer in the process. This with being outnumbered 100-1 in terms of personnel. The key had been to turn the FTL lanes back on, giving the broken fleet hopes of escape. But as they turned and prepared to flee, the humans just turned the gates back off. Across the galaxy, the Council species were learning just how little humanity cared about playing fair, or even being reasonable when it came to conflict. Scout vessels would fight to the death rather than surrender. Special forces would refuse to fight openly and instead harass and snipe garrisons. Not to mention, the carrier group that had glassed the crab colony was still on the loose. They'd jump into a system, destroy the merchant traffic, and orbital docks before jumping away. The Council was already having trouble convincing their member species to keep carrying military supplies. Most were opting for civilian supplies only, and marking their ships as such to avoid the wrath of the Americans. When a few Council member species approached the species the humans referred to as Borks for protection, the Council knew that they were in trouble. Member species were starting to prepare to join the fight due to their obligation to the galactic government, but the staggering losses inflicted upon the Council founders was making them drag their heels, so to speak. 3 outlying Kityan colonies, the closest neighbor to the humans, had surrendered to scout ships that were merely probing the systems. While no one seriously believed that 5 Marines could occupy each of these planets, they couldn't force the Kityans to fight. Not to mention all Kityan military vessels in the region were reporting engine troubles. The Phyllis, or Fleckos, as the humans called them, had long been a feared ground force that performed countless invasions through their history with galactic government. But against humans, they were useless. Their cultural battle dances meant nothing to humans who just cut them down with ballistic weapons. Although there were scattered reports of human military forces beating them at their own game by outdancing them, this wasn't the norm. Krustakan and Greslins were the only 2 species that were effective in ground combat against humanity, and while the galactic government had numbers to defeat them in space, and on the ground, no one was relishing the fact that it was going to take dozens of their own casualties for every American killed. They needed a win. But the Americans had destroyed the FTL gates closest to the planet, meaning it took days for ships to bring in reinforcements. This was leading to a cycle in the siege. Americans would have to repel mass waves for a local day, and then get 2 to recover. Theoretically, siege warfare should favor the Xenos, who had superior shielding technology and superior numbers. Americans, however, enjoyed messing up the theoretical warfare with actual warfare. Lines had been formed in the first week of the war for Bastion that hadn't changed much since. The humans had been building up their fortifications at a speed unheard of to the Xenos thanks to their strength and the fact that they were so used to wars with ballistic weapons. This was second nature to them. This did mean that they had to keep everything in working order, however, and since the military was more accustomed to blowing things apart than building them, they had to employ a certain siege masters to keep everything in check. The siege master of Sector 7 knew that they had 2 full local days to repair after the mass assault waves, but he was already out on the front lines during the attack. His helmet painted yellow, and his construction loader was in the thick of it. He had a cigar in his mouth as he worked the loader out along the emplacements. Even as the crabs blew up the bunker with artillery fire, he was there before the medics, bolting new plates into place. Sector 7's lines had never faltered, and it was in large thanks to the siege master. But the officers at the command bunkers on the second line were all still watching him, as the captain tried to explain to a colonel what they were seeing. So how come he doesn't wait? I mean, he's a great help, but we have to watch artillery fire or else we might hit the crazy fecker. He says that he has to keep up with his wife's kill count, and this is the only way to do it. As they watched, the construction loader turned and stomped on a charging crab, crushing it in a gush of that hydrating mucus they were covered in. Then one of the forearms lashed out, a massive saw blade cutting through another two before it turned back to the job at hand. The paint was partially melted on the outside of the loader. The bot had a good generator, but he absorbed a hell of a lot of fire. So, our siege master is in a competition with his wife, and that's why he's hell-bent on killing as many crabs as possible, while also fixing up our fortifications. That is correct, sir. The bot staggered as an armored crab in a power suit advanced, firing the much bigger energy weapon it possessed. The construction bot turned and pulled out a bolt gun of appropriate size for a 10-foot-tall machine. It charged forward, grappling with the armored crab before pressing the bolt gun to its face and driving a steel bolt through the brain of the crab inside. Then it turned back to the bunker it was fixing, bolting in a final slab of steel before knocking on it with a big metal fist to indicate that he was done. The Marines inside quickly moved the gear back into position as the construction bot jogged down the line. A crab flyer had ploughed into a section of the emplacements as it died, and the crabs were swarming over the area to take advantage of the temporary hole in the lines. But it was very temporary. The bot ignited an oxyacetylene torch, and the crabs started to flee, but not before a dozen of them had been part burned, part melted by the stream of fire. Then the bot pulled the flyer apart, hammering the metal into appropriate shapes to fill the hole made by its demise. When another wave of crabs tried to advance on the construction bot, it ripped a chunk of metal free of the flyer and turned, throwing a fastball at the crab holding a matter-slammer tube. The chunk of metal pulped the crab, and the others began to scatter once more. One guy in the construction bot is doing the work of our usual combat engineer team. Yes, sir, while under fire. The bot finished forming the flyer into a makeshift barricade and then climbed over it, hammering the top of the wreckage flat, then picking up a collection of sandbags to form a better protected firing position. Nearby Marines were waiting with a 50 cal, which the bot picked up and bolted into place on the top of the barricade it had just made. The Marines started to swarm up and fire down on the advancing crabs, now that the barricade had been formed for them. I mean, it is his job as the siege master. They're supposed to advise us on where to build emplacements and keep them repaired after the fighting is over. You didn't think to report this to me sooner. The man deserves a fecking medal, even if he is going through our construction supplies at record rates. The colonel and the captain left the command bunker as the bot approached the supply depot nearby to restock and rearm. As they got closer, the colonel could see the writing on the back of the bot. It was a bit smudged here or there, but it was obviously reapplied every day to keep it legible. It was a list of sorts. It read, Ted Rex, Archangel, Captain Bad at Sports, Mary Jane, Ghost Corps Sergeant, Softball Outfielder, Jackie Jill, Goddamn Swimmer, Stevie Ray, Fecking Naval Engineer, but also Letterman QB. Then, at the bottom it said, Biddy Bob, National Fecking Baseball Champ. This was underlined. The colonel looked at his captain. Wait, you don't mean... The construction bot turned as the man inside got a look at the two officers. He blew a stream of cigar smoke out of the corner of his mouth. What? Those names in your back of your bot? Do you mean to say that you're... That's right, the man nodded and turned back to keep picking up supplies. I really am Marty Stew, father of national champ Billy Bob. The officers glanced at one another. You mean the guy who started this war, right? The proud American who vowed to fight injustice and terrorism rampant in the galactic government. Shouldn't that be in the back of your bot? No, it's Billy Bob, national champ. But the bot turned as the man angrily growled out. Billy Bob, national champ. Then he began to strut off towards the front lines again as he played music over the suit's external speakers. Well, you can tell by the way I use my walk. I'm a woman's man. No time to talk. See, that's what I mean, Colonel. He's a strange guy. All he cares about is the fact that his son is Billy Bob, national champ. Billy Bob's greatest injury from entering the strange pocket dimension had been that he came flying out of it onto the floor. So he pulled himself up after Emily got off of him, still hugging the stuffed animal he found, and rubbed his neck, looking around the room. How much time passed? Just a minute or so, maybe, the chief sneaky busybody said. Oh, well, I guess time in the pocket dimension passes at the speed of regular time. Then he shrugged a bit. He had no idea how any of that stuff worked, but he knew it wasn't the same as the skip drives that bounced off the edges of reality. This pocket dimension was much more calm, and it didn't feel like colors that didn't exist were trying to force their way into his eyeballs. He looked over at Emily, who was obviously happy to have the six-limbed stuffed bunny back, hugging it to her chest as she nuzzled it. What's that about? Percy, he's my favorite stuffed animal. When they gave me the pocket dimension, they told me to try it out with something personal. And then they couldn't get it back, so I was really mad about that, but here he is. She gave him another squeeze. Yeah, but why do you have him? Oh, well, these represent these animals on our home planet. They make for good pets. But you have to be careful since they have delicate skin. Parents give their kids one of these to check for scratch marks to see if their child is ready for a pet. She happily nuzzled the toy as she saw her feathers ruffle a bit as she rubbed her face against the fake fur. Or he assumed it was fake fur. Billy Bob looked at it for a moment and thought over how much pain she had caused him by being very unaware of his delicate skin. Then he gasped and pointed at her. They never let you have one, did they? They kept checking the toy and realized that you'd have to kill that poor thing in a second. She stopped cuddling the thing, and she looked wide-eyed and red-handed. Winged? He still needed to figure out the best way to translate his sayings to her species. I mean, she did have hands. Whatever. She opened her mouth for a moment and then closed it. Well... He clutched his face with both hands as a realization hit him. That's why you're so bad with your claws. Look, it's fine. I can just keep wearing my gloves. We made them for the reason. But not good enough for your parents. What kind of diplomat can't think about the needs of a creature who simply wants not to be torn to shreds by your sharp claws? Emily stared at him for a moment and then glanced away as he stared at her. It took him a moment, but then some factors quickly connected in his head. The black survival suit, the pocket dimension. She knew about the Libertonian team hiding in the council system. The fight back at the museum. She didn't know quite what to do, but she knew more than a diplomat should. Wait. Even back with battling the space clown, she knew how to hotwire that security panel. She was turned on by killing. His gasp this time was even deeper and more drawn out as he pointed at her. You're not a diplomat at all. She looked worried as he said that, which was about as much confirmation as he needed. Well, I am, but my training, Lies upon lies. It's like I don't even know you. That's why you were surprised I didn't hunt. And why you've never been worried at all about the death and gore and stuff. You didn't hesitate when those crabs attacked us at the museum. Just the box 'cause you didn't have your gear. But you said you weren't a soldier because... His eyes went wide. You're a space assassin, aren't you? She stood there, wings seeming more closed around her shoulders than usual. She was holding the stuffed animals close still, but was glancing around rather than looking right at him. Finally, she glanced at him with one eye to try and gauge his reaction. Are you mad? He could tell how worried she was at his sudden realization why some things about her had never quite added up. He'd never really thought about some of the inconsistencies because it was so close to his own behavior. But now so much of it made sense. A real diplomat would have been freaked out of all the chaos and laws I was breaking, and you'd have realized the feelings you had for me sooner. And we've been solving everything through violence. You never opposed that idea, because that would have been your idea, not to mention getting off the museum planet. You were okay with the plan to slaughter our way into that base because you didn't know how to talk us through it either. Since all the violence was turning you on, you didn't realize that you were getting attached to me, which would start off your crazy hormone drive because you thought it was a normal sort of arousal from all the combat. Oh, my Washington! She clutched a stuffed animal, looking at him with more worry and apprehension than as she looked ready to either cry or beg for forgiveness and acceptance. Then he started laughing. The hamsters and Emily all blinked in confusion, and his boisterous laugh filled the room. The corners of his eyes filling with tears as the whole situation simply took control of his mind, and him laughing so hard he had to clutch his sides and then sit down. Slowly his laughter died out as he had to take some deep breaths to make up for all the laughing he'd done. Finally, he shook his head and rubbed a few tears from the corner of his eyes. "Too funny." "You're not mad?" She looked hopeful now, her wings opening up a little as she seemed more amused about what he found out than anything. "Why keep it a secret? Yes, that's fine. I can see why an assassin wouldn't be all like, 'Hey, I'm assassin,' to some random civvy you just met, especially one as weird as me. But you had to be planning on telling me at some point, and, if you're an assassin, why did you say that we'd have all those diplomatic dinners to go to?" "Well, I like diplomatic dinners. I'm just, not allowed to be the prime diplomat because, I'm not a very good one." He laughed again and let out a happy sigh. "Oh, too good. Well, that explains a lot. It really does. I'm guessing you were going to tell me eventually?" "Once it was all over." She looked a little bashful as she reached out with her two left hands to stroke his face and shoulder. "You're not mad?" Billy Bob just smiled and pulled her upper hand to his lips to give it a light kiss. "Nah, but it explains a lot. Could have saved me a lot of time figuring things out if you'd been upfront about it. Of course, this does mean I have to be even more careful about you. It was bad enough when I figured that you weren't used to other species. But now that I know you enjoy hurting me, that's going to take some adjustment." "I do not. It's always a mistake, I swear." "Uh-huh," he said with a slow nod. The entire time the hamsters had been staring back and forth between the two of them. Clearly, they weren't interested in interrupting two predators from death worlds, especially when one of them apparently enjoyed violence, while the other simply used it rather often. Finally, the chief sneaky busybody raised up his hand. "Oh, yes?" Billy Bob asked. "We're about to meet up with that space goblin ship that we mentioned." "Oh!" He got up then, and Emily looked conflicted about where to put her stuffed animal. "Just bring it. Stow it in the Longhorn when we head into the cargo bay." She smiled at that, and they exited the captain's room as they walked down to the cargo bay. Emily stashed Percy in the Longhorn while they waited for other ship to dock with the Atlas. Since it was a cargo ship, there was a docking back made for cargo transfers such as this one, although Billy Bob still wasn't sure what it was they were picking up. When the airlock opened, Billy Bob nodded at the space goblins, who were escorting a crate into the cargo bay. Most of the hamsters were still at their stations around the ship. They tried to break jobs down into as specific tasks as possible, since they were terrible at multitasking. There was a reason Billy Bob could pilot the thing on his own, but it took a whole bridge crew for the hamsters. Billy Bob helped the goblins stand the large crate they'd brought in on its edge and then looked around while they all looked at him. Soon, everyone was just sort of looking around at each other because no one had spoken. Finally, Billy Bob held out his hand. "So, what's up?" "Oh, right, Billy Bob, this is the engineer I told you about, Mike Zubitz," the chief sneaky busybody said. "You didn't tell me about an engineer." "No?" "No." "Oh, well, I meant to tell you about him. He's here with your suit I told you about." "You didn't mention a suit either. You just said something to help disguise me." "Oh, well, I'll let him explain." The hamster shuffled back as one of his lead goblins smiled up at Billy Bob. "Oh, it was a unique challenge, to be assured. I had to make this with much more dense materials than normal. A challenge to work with which made it very enjoyable for me. So I present to you..." He pushed a button on the edge of the crate, and the door opened to reveal a Bork, a bit bigger than Billy Bob, standing there, eyes closed. It took a moment before Billy Bob blinked and stepped back. "Wait, you made me a suit out of a Bork?" "No, it's not real. It's a disguised power suit," the goblin said with a big grin. Then Billy Bob blinked as he stepped up and gave it a tap. The fur didn't quite feel right, and usually flesh didn't make a metallic noise when you tapped it. "Holy shit," he muttered as he looked it over. That's awesome. That's how we'll be able to fuck up their security even better. Perfect." He was obviously excited. "Wait, but I don't know how to pilot a power suit." "Well, you need to learn quick," Emily said. He tapped his chin and shrugged as he slowly worked the power suit out of the case it was in. I do know the perfect song for getting used to something quickly in a short amount of time. He smiled and then quickly connected his implant to the speakers in the cargo room. Soon, they were all listening to the song as he started to try and open the back of the power suit. The hour's approaching. Just give it your best. You've got to reach your prime. That's when you need to put yourself to the test and show us the passage of time. We're gonna need a montage. Oh, it takes a montage. However, as the song finally faded out, Billy Bob had just gotten himself to fit inside the suit. Vic, is the song over already? For some reason, I was kind of hoping that it would somehow let me learn how to pilot this thing better over the course of the song. It's just a song, Billy Bob. You actually have to train, Emily said as she shook her head. I know that, damn it, but I'm going to put that on repeat for the next couple hours, so you guys might want to clear out of here. He internalized the speaker and began to move slowly in the suit. Emily shook her head as the hamsters moved away with the goblins to discuss their payment and next plans. Billy Bob was soon alone in the cargo bay, slowly moving around as he had his own little montage going in his head. And so ends another chapter in the adventures of Billy Bob Space Trucker and National Champ. I would like to thank our T5 members and patrons, Casper Arnholtz, Jon Creighton, W.R.E, 050, Dragzoon W.R.E, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.